everyone, my name is Sarah, you're watching I Talk Notebooks, and today we are doing the Topics in Journaling video for April. And today's topic is going to be honesty in journaling. So today we're going to talk about what that means, whether it's something you need to add or amplify to your journaling practice, and if so, what are some ways that you can actually incorporate them more into your journaling life. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we need to do is define honesty in journaling, specifically within the context of journaling, because honesty with another person in a relationship can look quite different than honesty in your journal. So everybody has their own perspective on what honesty means to them, but what makes the journals different than relationships with other people is the journals don't have boundaries with them necessarily. So for example, if you are a parent and you have a kid and your kid wants to know something, you don't need to necessarily be honest with your kid if that information is not appropriate for them to know or is going to be harmful to them somehow. That's up to your discretion as a parent. And that's true in all kinds of relationships, as you move through life and have friendships and acquaintanceships and coworkers, you decide where you set your boundaries, how honest you want to be with your coworkers and things like that. And it doesn't mean that you're going around being intentionally deceitful and hurting people and withholding information that they're genuinely entitled to, but it's just about, being a conscious citizen of the world and not oversharing, not undersharing, and knowing when to stop talking and when to share. So that's what makes journals complicated, is because you don't have those boundaries. You don't have that defined relationship with the journal. So that's why this definition is a little bit different. So the way we can define honesty in journaling is more by a litmus test. And if I'm touching my nose a lot, I don't know why, my face is really itchy all of a sudden. And maybe breaking out in hives. But the litmus test we can use, as I was saying before, to determine whether or not you're being honest in your journal can be based on kind of what you notice as you're journaling, whenever you do sit down to journal or stand up to journal. I don't know, maybe you like to stand. So are you holding things back consciously when you write? So this is a good litmus test right there. As you're writing and you notice you're talking about a situation or whatever, and you're thinking a sentence in your head that you would be about to write down, because with journaling by hand especially, but even with typing, for most of us, you can't write as fast as you think. So you end up sitting there what the next thing you want to say is. But if you find yourself not writing something that came into your head that you would have written next in another situation, you may not be being fully honest in your journals. Another question you can ask to determine whether or not you're being fully honest in your journals is, are you minimizing situations or feelings? So that's another one too. You can be writing about something that's going on and you can leave out a detail so that it doesn't sound as bad, or you can, avoid going into your feelings where you might normally want to go and explore those feelings a little more deeply because you don't want to get into those feelings for whatever reason, whether they're uncomfortable or make you feel like a bad person. That may indicate that you're not being fully honest in your journals, and that there's something you're kind of hiding from your journals, and therefore perhaps trying to hide from yourself on some level. And that's the real key here, is that with honesty in journaling, the journal is a reflection of yourself. So if there's something you're being dishonest about in your journals, you may be being dishonest with yourself. That's a possibility. But I don't want you guys to get worried watching this and start to kind of overanalyze, because that's something I definitely do when I watch videos like this. Because, this is different than being optimistic or, having multiple perspectives. That's not dishonesty. Whoops. That doesn't mean that you're being dishonest. Lots of people in their journals will write about fantasy situations as though they're really happening, or, argue with yourself in your journal, even though one position you're taking you might not even take. There's lots of things we do in our journals that don't have to be directly correlated with the truth of your feelings, and it doesn't mean you're being dishonest because you know what's going on and you're being honest with yourself. It's more like when you're leaving something out and you know you're doing it, and you know you're doing it intentionally to be dishonest. You can kind of feel it. It's kind of a circular definition. It's kind of like you know it when you're doing it. But those two, like if you're minimizing a situation or if you're holding things back that you did definitely think and you were about to write, but then you thought, no, I don't actually want to write this down, that can be a sign of dishonesty. Now, the first thing that you should keep in mind when you're going into this kind of discussion or thought pattern with yourself is that you don't have to be honest in your journals at all. You may not be comfortable being honest in your journals, and it may hold you back from journaling as much as you'd like to, because now you see journaling as this kind of tell-all place where you have to dive into things that you're not comfortable with, that you're not ready for, and that you don't want to talk about. And the minute that discomfort reaches a certain threshold, you're going to start discouraging yourself from journaling. A good analogy for this would be sorry, let me add a bullet point here. If you're too uncomfortable with honesty, you might stop journaling. So a good analogy for this is exercise. So if you are somebody who goes to the gym and you're like, I have to do all these exercises that I hate doing, and I have to do them for this long, and I have to do this much weight, or I have to do this, I have to achieve this metric, and it's going to hurt a lot, and I'm going to be really tired and uncomfortable the entire time, then you're probably going to be less likely to go to the gym. Even though, your goals might be fine in and of themselves, but it may just be a very unpleasant situation for you that isn't, it just won't be worth it, so you won't go to the gym. But instead, you could kind of limit yourself a little bit and be like, this is right where I get up to the point of discomfort, so I still am exercising, I'm stretching myself, I'm pushing myself, like I can feel that edge of that discomfort, but I'm not pushing myself so far into the territory where I'm just absolutely miserable and hate going and don't want to go back. And I'm conditioning myself to hate this and not to do it. So that's definitely something you want to watch out with if you feel like you're having to be too honest. And one of the things that was told to me by a therapist a while ago that was really helpful is that if you have a subject in your mind that when you want to go there or you think about going there, whether it's just sitting by yourself or even in your journals or talking to somebody else, and there's just that door slamming shut like I'm not going there, sometimes that is just a time issue. That doesn't always mean that you're in denial or that you're a dishonest and bad person or that you're somebody who's immature and can't grow up and face reality. It may just mean that your brain is protecting itself and it's going to take time before you're ready to go there and to start unpacking that and processing that and figuring out what, if anything, you want to do about that situation or topic. So sometimes you just need time, and you know that that situation is there, and eventually you may get there in your journals. And that's happened to me a few times too, where it's like, I know I'm not ready to talk about this now, but even in my journals, but eventually I'll get there. And as long as you aren't like squirreling away something unhealthily in a way that is harming you, the time might just be the very thing that you need. So you may just need more time. So don't worry if this topic is making you a little bit worried and you're starting to feel really uncomfortable. And just don't worry about that. Like, we're just talking about, if you feel like you want to be more honest, if you think that's something that's going to be helpful to you, that's what the rest of this video is about. And so why would you want to be more honest? Because it is uncomfortable, right? Kind of just like going to the gym, even just if you are pushing yourself up to the edge of discomfort, right where it's sort of, you can really feel yourself working, but not to the point where you're like doubled over in pain and can't breathe. Why would you want to do that either? Why do you want to cause yourself any discomfort or any pain? Because these are things that humans naturally want to avoid very, very much. But just like with going to the gym, there's a wide range of benefits that can happen when you start to be more honest in your journaling. So let's talk about some of those. Benefits of honesty in journaling. So you can, if you're more honest when you journal, you're able to kind of evaluate a situation more thoroughly. So as you're sitting there writing things down, you find yourself coming face to face with the facts of a situation or everything you know about a situation, and you may make insights as you see those words down on the page. You may make connections. I'm sure you've noticed that when you're reading a book, especially like a self-help book or something or anything nonfiction, you may start to make connections that the author isn't explicitly making because it's a well-written book and because you have a brain and you're going to apply it to what you're reading. And that's really cool. And you can also do that with your journals, because as you're writing things down, it's like reading your own thoughts from a book, and you can start to see those things like with your eyeball and make connections. So as you're making those connections, you can really have greater wisdom over time. That's the main takeaway from this point. And you can also grow to understand whether something is a big deal. And I've talked about this in previous videos as well, which is why hopefully this one will be a little longer, because there's a lot of overlap with previous topics I've already covered and we've already talked about here. But as you are having a thought in your head that you're worried about or that you're nervous about and that you don't want to talk about, you can get to a point where this thing is looming in your head like this huge, scary monster, especially if it's, obviously if it's negative, and seem like this overwhelming thing that you're never going to be able to undertake. But sometimes when you write it down, you realize you read it as though someone else had written it, because now it's just words on a page. It could be from anybody, and you realize this isn't actually that big of a deal. And that's one of the biggest benefits from journaling in general. And the more honest you are, the more you're going to write down things that scare you, and the more you're going to be able to realize that a lot of those things are not as scary as they seem. Now, obviously, some things are very scary in life. Like, there are going to be some things you write down and it doesn't feel any better. It could even feel worse to be looking at it face to face. But in most cases, I think you'll find that your fears are a lot less scary written down. So be honest about them. Another great thing about honesty in journaling is being able to see your journey over time. So I noticed this a lot. Recently, I was working on a project that required me to skim through about 20 of my most recent journals. It was a ton. I have never done anything like that before. I had them out all over the place. I did it in a Starbucks, and I did it in a Starbucks, and it was just chaos. There were journals everywhere. I had sticky notes, and as I was skimming through them, I didn't read them all, but as I was skimming through them, I started to see patterns that I hadn't noticed before, like over a lot of time, like 3 years, which in my life, when you're my age, 3 years is a pretty big percentage of your life, especially when, my brain is just on the cusp of finishing its development. And so, like, the last 3 years are more significant than maybe my childhood. So seeing patterns that were kind of emerging as I kind of grew into adulthood was really enlightening and eye-opening. And a lot of it was not pleasant. A lot of it was really ugly and kind of opened my eyes to things I need to change, which was unpleasant, because all that honesty that I had been kind of applying, I've been much more honest in recent years. That can kind of, make you feel like kind of a cringy person at worst or best, or maybe like kind of a bad person at worst, but like being able to see those patterns is really valuable. A lot of people don't have that ability to look back and have that kind of insight on the type of person that they are in their innermost thoughts. So being able to see that kind of helped me to not only realize that there are certain things that maybe I need to change, but also to observe patterns in my life that I hadn't observed before. Like, when I think that a situation is going to turn out a certain way, it may turn out this other way instead. Or I hadn't noticed that this thing kept happening to me over and over again because I wasn't looking back through my journals, but it did. It kept happening over and over. So this thing is likely to happen again. So that's one thing. And in my case, it was extremely peace-giving, because it kind of showed me that even though I was very upset or worried a lot of the time about certain things, that those things inevitably ended up being good. And it just kind of showed me that I don't need to worry about those things anymore. I can kind of let those worries go. So I really have felt, ever since I did that, like a very strong peace in that area. It's just like I'm not worried about it anymore. And no amount of, the old feelings coming up, or somebody kind of using a scare tactic with me, and this bad thing could happen. We see it on the news every day, or people in your life might be kind of negative, and just knowing that things have worked out can be really helpful, especially if you're honest about what you did that day, or what happened that day, or how you felt about it. And just seeing that contrast of how I felt about something versus what it actually was really eye-opening. But for you, it might be a totally different connection altogether. You might see that you're being too flippant about things, and maybe you need to worry a little more and be a little more prepared. So that's why that's going to be unique to you, tailored to you. There's no app, there's no program that can really get you that kind of data over time. So I highly recommend trying to be more honest just for that reason alone, because journaling is about growth too. You can really get a lot of growth from it. So If you're not being honest, you might miss out on important data points that could have helped you grow faster. Another reason is, decision making. If you, and this kind of ties into all the previous ones too, but like you have all the details laid out in front of you, you have some context, and now you've been detailing your journey over time, so you can see how past situations have affected you, and it's just going to help you have better information to make decisions with when you're more honest. If you write an honest pros or cons list in your journal, you're going to be able to decide what to do in a way that you know it's going to resonate with you. And it's just personalized to you. It's not going to have to do with anybody else or outside forces. Or if it is, you could even note that. Like, I feel like I'm leaning towards this decision because of this outside influence. Like, I saw this on TV, or I saw this on YouTube. That's my big one. Or somebody told me this, and now I feel like I have to do this decision, even though it may not be what makes me the happiest. And, you know, only you can decide what's going to work for you in the long term. Nobody can tell you that. Nobody can. Even if you're a religious or spiritual person, those things are highly up to interpretation and your interpretation, and everyone will tell you that. Like, there's very few objective guidelines you can live by. So just looking at the past and the present and trying to understand how your life works, that's a good way to know what decisions to make, in my experience. So now that we're all excited about honesty and journaling, and some of you might be going, you know, I want to increase this. I want to make this happen for me. Well, first, what do we have to do? We have to get through the barriers to honesty in journaling, because there are barriers. If there were not barriers, if this was not something that people had a hard time with, I wouldn't be making the video. It is. So for this section, it's going to be pretty brief because I'm just going to link to other videos where I cover these topics. A lot of these have to do with the why am I not journaling type thing, because people tend to find when they can't feel honest in their journals, they don't want to write at all. It's kind of the flip side to the other thing. If you're too honest, you may not want to write, but if you're not honest at all, it's like, what's the point? What am I even writing about? Like, the weather's nice. It's boring. I don't feel like writing. So one of the big barriers is the worry that I'm going to read this back later. And I'm going to link a video up here somewhere, iCard type thing. And but just for a quick summary, you'll notice that, reading back your journals can be tough. It can be rough, especially if you were honest. You can be like, wow, I was like a really terrible person that day. I was really rude, or I had like a really mean thought. But, you know what? It's just like what I said before. You can, if you're willing to like really self-reflect and acknowledge, like, yeah, that was an ugly thought. I wish I wouldn't have thought that. Why did I think that? You can actually change your thought patterns, but you can't change something that you're not aware of. So it's actually helpful. The really worrying thing is that someone else is going to read this. And again, I'm going to put a link up here. This is a common worry with every facet of journaling that keeps people from writing. And when you're honest, it's even scarier, because someone could read it and now they're reading like some real thoughts that you had. Like, there's real stuff in there, not just what ifs, not just, you know, today I went to the grocery store. Not just that stuff. You've got real worries that somebody's going to see something you wrote that they're going to think differently about you. Like, wow, I didn't know you thought that. Here's what you need to remember. The person who's judging you, they have thoughts like that too. They just don't write them down. And a lot of people who don't keep journals don't understand that writing a thought down for someone like us who does keep a journal, when you write that down, it doesn't mean you're giving that thought special importance. It doesn't mean like you're writing down, this is the most important thought I've had today, or this is what I like most about myself. You're writing for the sake of either venting or trying to find patterns or just trying to find some comfort in your day. There's lots of different reasons that we write in our journals. But for most of us, it's not, this is the most important thing that I want everyone to remember me by. It isn't. And so, you know, this person who's judging you has had the same thoughts. They just didn't write their thoughts down. And they think that because you took the time to write it down, that means it's a special thought that you think you'll stand by forever. And that's just not the case. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of conflicts that are going to come up. As if you're someone who journals, there's going to be a lot of conflicts that can come up around that, because they don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. They're going to make assumptions about it. And there's nothing you can do about that to change it, except for letting go of that. Like, if someone might read this, like, I can't guarantee no one's going to violate my privacy and read this. If they do, that's on them, not on me. That's just the only thing you can do is have that mantra, like, that's on them, not on me. Because if you succumb to that pressure, oh my gosh, someone could read this, they're going to think terrible things about me and try to hold me responsible for what I felt that day or what I wrote down that day, then you're missing out on all the benefits that we talked about before. And is that worth it? Do you want to live in fear of somebody else trying to hold you responsible for being, again, a responsible citizen, trying to record things and handle your feelings in the best way you know how and to try to be healthy? Or are you really going to let that person keep you from being able to do that? No, you shouldn't. And the third one is writing it down makes it real. So this is another one about like being afraid and things. But if you have a scary thought and you write it down, and sometimes you're afraid that it's just going to be staring you in the face. Like, if, let's say you are in some debt, you're like, I'm in X number of dollars worth of debt. Like, if you write that down on paper, see that number, like, oh my gosh, it's right there in front of me. That's terrifying. Then, yeah, it is scary. It is scary, but it could be the wake-up call that you need. It could be the opposite, like we talked about before. It could make it seem smaller, like, oh, that's not such a high number, I could pay that off in a few months. Like, whatever it is, like, if there's something you're avoiding writing down, there's a reason for it, and if that reason is anything other than trauma, it might be more beneficial to just get it out there and be able to see it. And likewise, this one ties into, you can be afraid to face your demons, which is kind of a dramatic way of saying, like, when you write down your own personal problems, it can be intimidating because those take a lot of work to overcome. Those can take a lot of courage to overcome and to face, and it's easier to just be in denial sometimes. And when you look at that on the paper, you're like, now I have to do something about it, and I don't know what to do. But that could be the first step in you formulating a plan, brainstorming, doing a brain dump of ways you can get around a problem, reaching out for help if you need it. Like, that can be a good first step, because everyone always says this, you can't solve your problem until you admit you have one. So whatever that problem is, whether it's a little bit of debt, whether it's, leaving your coat on the floor instead of hanging it up in the closet, like, however it is, like, your character flaws, like, you can overcome those. But being like in a point where you don't even want to write it down, you're not getting there any faster. So finally, to close out this video, what everyone's been waiting for, here are some tips to be more honest in your journaling. So here's one that worked pretty well for me, is create a quarantine section. I think I've talked about this in past videos before, but I would sometimes decorate these pages differently. I'd do like washi tape edges, or I'd write quarantine on the top, or do something cute that would kind of get me feeling a little more whimsical about it instead of intimidated. And then I was able to, I think something may be going on with my microphone, so if that's the case, I'm so sorry. But as I made these quarantine sections, I would also paperclip them off with paper clips. So I wouldn't have to look at them unless I was 100% ready to see those pages, if they were a difficult subject or something that I was afraid to write about. And I would just, if I had something on that subject to write, I'd go back to that section and I would go and fill it in. I haven't done this in a while because, over time things have gotten easier and I haven't had anything to quarantine in a while, but I think that, life comes and goes. There's always hard times ahead, so I think that that could be a useful technique, again, at one point. Another thing that you can do is you can write as if the hard parts have already been written down. So instead of saying, let's say something really, let's say your boss yelled at you at work. That'd be terrible, right? That'd be just horrible. I wouldn't want to write about that. That would make me feel so ashamed and terrible and low and bad and afraid that I was going to lose my job. Like, that's the kind of thing that I would be tempted not to write about. So here's what you can do. Write as if you already explained what happened. You don't have to say, today I came in late to work and my boss was mad. He said, you've been doing this for too long. I'm going to have to put you in a performance improvement program if this goes on. You're a terrible employee. I wish I never hired you. If you better, and he just chewed me out. Like, you don't need to write all that. You can just write. Instead, just start the entry with, after what happened this morning, I've been feeling this way and that way, and I feel like the best way to improve and to make sure I'm on time is to set my alarm earlier. Or you can just start going straight in for solutions or diving into your feelings about it and just all that stuff, instead of having to rehash what happened, because you know what happened. You're not writing this for anybody else. You may not find a benefit in that. And also what can happen is after you work on solutions and feelings and, you know, the fallout and the chaos in your mind, at that point you might be able feeling a little bit better. And you might realize, you know, maybe my boss didn't yell at me that loudly and it didn't go on for as long as I thought and I kind of overblew it. And, you know, it was more of a lecture, and here's what he said. Actually, as I'm remembering, it was really just these things. I kind of added the rest in my head, and, you know, now that I have a solution, this just doesn't seem so scary. So then you can go back and add the narrative if you want to. But I found this to be really helpful because there were some things that I felt like I was never going to get into if I didn't just get into some part of it. So I sort of started in the middle instead of at the beginning. You can also use code words. So if you're, you know, I'm going to use my journal as a period tracker, but I have some period embarrassment. You know, that's normal. A lot of our culture does instill that in us. So I'm going to just call it and flow and write about that whenever I want to write about, like, tracking my period. So you can do that if you want to be honest about that, but you don't want other people to be like, what? You have to use something a little more obvious and less obvious than and flow. But if you're afraid of somebody else coming to read it, finding out your information, just use code words. So you'll know what you're talking about looking back, but nobody else is going to have any clue. And the other thing I would recommend is to look back infrequently. I don't go back and reading my journals every day. Maybe once a year I'll go back and glance through one or two of them. If you're going to do like a big deep dive, like I kind of, not a deep dive, but a big skim, or even a big deep dive like I did recently. I did not do a deep dive, I did a skim. But if you want to do either of those things, you can just limit that to not very frequently, because if you're looking back at your journals all the time, especially really recent ones, it can kind of make you, it can sting and it can make you feel like, oh man, I just wrote that yesterday and that's so terrible. Or, you know, that was so hard, and it makes you feel like it's harder to be honest than it really is. Whereas if you let time kind of put some distance between you and the situation, when you go back and read about it, it's like, oh, you know, this was such a big deal at the time, but now I can just see it as a data point and I can gain perspective from it. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys. Let me know in the comments if you have any tips on honesty and journaling for the rest of us, or if you have anything you want to share about your own personal stance on honesty and journaling and how it has helped or not helped you. Let us know. But until next time, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.